writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. I'm your host, Stephanie McGrath, and here's my rotating co-host,
Tara Kremen, here for the week.
So in this episode, we talked to Anthony Dobranski. He is a writer of fantasy and science fiction novels, and he also designed and created the business class tarot deck, which Tara actually saw in person and is where she met him.
Yes. This tarot deck caught my eye at Superstars Writing Seminar in Colorado Springs. And then I got chatting to Anthony and found out that he wrote the book, The Demon in Business Class, which has just been re-released with a brand spanking new cover that looks really great.
Great cover.
Yeah, but the business class tarot was used within the book, and then fans started asking him whether or not this actually existed, and wheels started turning for Anthony, and he decided to design them himself. So it's kind of a really interesting way to expand on like a standalone novel and how you can have like merch basically for people to buy besides your book. So there's like two little merch avenues that Anthony has.
This episode is a little bit longer because he actually gives me a reading using his tarot deck, which if you're interested in actually seeing what the cards look like and the kind of spread that he used, you can check that out on our YouTube channel, Kobo Writing Life. We'll also have a link to it in our description. And not only is Anthony giving listeners 26% off the Demon in Business Class, he is also doing a giveaway on our Instagram where a listener can get the tarot deck. So make sure to stay tuned to the end of this episode to learn how to enter into this giveaway and learn about the coupon code that you can use to get 26% off. So big episode, a little bit longer, but we think you're going to really enjoy it. So please keep listening. Thank you, Anthony, for joining us today.
Delighted to be here.
So before we get into this jam-packed episode, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
I'm a writer in Washington, D.C. I started writing about 5-7 years ago, seriously, and I have one novel out. It's actually about to be reissued. It's called The Demon in Business Class, and it's an urban fantasy, and it's, as you'll hear, the genesis of the tarot, of the business class tarot idea. And that was published 3 years ago. It's about to be reissued again, so if we have any readers who want to check out a great urban fantasy, that's available. As for me, I live in Washington, D.C., I'm a native of this city. I'm an unusual person because there's a lot of people who come in for work and life, but I've been here since the beginning and made my first career at America Online, which was based just outside DC in Northern Virginia. And that was a pretty amazing job, and it sent me all over the world, which is how I got some business experience. It's how I got the background for my novel, which is sort of set in that same business class habit trail around the world. And it also, I think, gave me a bit more comfort in adapting, the power concepts of the tarot to the modern idiom. I mean, because, we don't have kings anymore, but we certainly have CEOs and they're a big presence in modern life. So being able to adapt that was, I think, helpful with my own business experience.
Nice. So, Anthony, I met you at Superstars Writing Seminar, and so I was at the conference in Colorado, and they always have these tables of books that people have brought and that can buy. So I, had a little break in between the talks, and I was perusing the stands, and immediately my eye went to this like business tarot, and I was like, what is this? And I was asking the people at the counter, and they're like, there's an open deck over there, and like you can play with them. So I was like playing around and like reading what they were, and I just thought it was so awesome. So I bought a set, and then later you were doing readings, so I was like, okay, tell me everything about this deck. And so I really, really loved the idea. Can you talk about like why you decided to create this tarot card set in general? Sure. And maybe like a little bit about what it is.
First, what it is an authentic working tarot deck, all 78 cards that are used in the traditional tarots. Tarot itself has a kind of an odd history in that they began as playing cards. And if you look at the suits that are used in traditional tarot, the swords, the clubs, they're actually the kind of playing card suits you'll find around Mediterranean countries, the kind that we use in English-speaking countries or Anglophone countries. We tend to have inherited from the French style with the spades and the club trefoils, but the ones that they use in tarot are Italian and Spanish, much more common. Now, somehow in Italy, they got these other cards shoved in. No one really can explain how. The emperor, the star, all these very allegorical cards. The best theory that I've heard, and my personal favorite that I adopt, is that they were originally meant as a kind of a public service announcement for a pre-literate era. The dangers of gambling, think about the greater things than just, card playing. And of course, in the way that people do, they adopted them ironically and stuck them in the card deck and made gaming elements out of them. But over time, they became part of the fortune-telling tradition with tarot. But over time, they also became a little bit outdated. Even the most popular decks in the Western world, they tend to be very male-dominated. They tend to be very using all these symbols and ideas that really don't speak to a modern era's concept of power dynamics, which is finally what a lot of these meetings are about. And I was writing a novel where I was using tarot as a foreshadowing device. My main character, Zarabeth, she reads her cards and she actually guides her actions by them. But she wasn't clicking with them. It was very hard to make her work with these outdated concepts because she was a modern woman in marketing and living her life in a very different way. So I thought, well, what if I translate the tarot to a modern idea of power with boards of directors instead of hierophants, with concepts that she was able to embrace, like brand instead of cups. The cup necessarily, we still kind of get that, but we know what a brand is. We know what it's meant to do. So that really is where the inspiration was in the book. And then at Comic-Cons, when I would market it and I would meet fans who had read the book, and they'd say, so that deck is really cool. What deck does she use? Where can I get it? And I had to say for a while, well, it doesn't really exist. It was just a thing I made up for the novel. And after a while, I realized, that's neither a satisfying nor a commercially successful answer to that question. So then I started seeing, well, what would it take? My editor was very encouraging. She actually wanted to be involved with the project, but it didn't work for time. And I found, after some hunting around, I found an artist who both had, some understanding of this, but also had, his name is Jamin Hoyle. And his day job is in advertising, but he was looking for a fine arts project. He also teaches commercial art at Virginia Commonwealth University. So he was kind of a good fit in that he understood the idiom, he understood the constraints, he was used to working with both physical products, but also with this conceptual thing I was working on. And we worked together. It was a splendid connection. So I made a tarot deck. I wrote a guidebook trying to make it both drive like a tarot for people who are already mystical and who are already interested in these things, but also totally open to new entrants, people who've never really played with the art form before, but who are curious about it because it's coming back into vogue. I'm very happy to have launched a tarot this time because people are starting to return to that kind of concept and are looking at it. There are people who do tarots on Twitter now and engage on Facebook doing them. So I feel very up to date.
Yeah, I really love the idea, just the idea that it came from your book, that you can create like a product that isn't a book that's coming from the story. And like, it's really great that you kind of like saw it through to completion. I'm like curious about like how, if authors can go back and like look at their other stories and things and like, is there something that I can pull out of the story that's like, moving it forward that could be a beneficial kind of like an additional bonus product for a reader that's really into it?
It's certainly, it was a fascinating thought experiment, and it took a lot of rethinking. The first thing you have to do is you have to step back and think about you're making something else. You're not making a thing with a bunch of words on it. It was almost like building a comic book that was only covers. And that was kind of how I had to think about it, that it was a very different form of adaptation. And it was less about my story and much more about my sensibility, which is not a way a lot of writers are used to thinking of it. It's almost like imagining a soundtrack for your story or for your novel, where you're not conveying actual plot points. You're conveying mood, you're conveying feeling, you're conveying, a sense of play even and fun, but your particular one. And I think that a lot of really good works, particularly if you look at something more multimedia, like a film that has both music and also visuals and also story, you kind of have to look at it that way. Like you've done the script in the form of your novel or in the form of your short story, but what would be the music for it? What would be the lighting for it? What would be the look of the people? And with mine in particular, I also had to consider that there was already an existing audience that was comfortable with the old way of doing tarot. There have definitely been people who've come up to me at Comic-Cons when I've had the deck, and they say like, well, it's a really good deck, but it's not mine. They definitely like that older romanticism. They definitely want the feeling of the Renaissance era, and that's great, whatever speaks to them. But there were other people who were like, oh, I want this. This speaks to me, which is kind of how I also find an urban fantasy audience for my novel. There are people who want swords, and there are people who want their modern day, but with a sense of the mystical, with a sense of the playful, a sense of the surreal and the unreal in it. So that was really my start. But yeah, if you want to pull a new medium out of your existing work, you really have to embrace what that new medium says, what that new medium's audience expects. You have to think about it in a very business and marketing-like way, and say, if someone who wants to buy this, someone who buys a Harry Potter wand, they're already a Harry Potter fan, and they're just getting, the wand because it's something they've seen in the movie. But if you're not dealing with that level of cultural knowledge, if you're dealing with something where you want people to engage with the work as it is, then you have to take it seriously, the work as it is. You have to step back from what you put in your novel. It's like, what can I put in a game that would be my game? What would I put in this thing that would be my thing, and that an audience that maybe wouldn't read my work, but who I would have a good time, chatting with, who I would have a good time playing with, what would they be into?
I'm just wondering what your research process was like trying to make the tarot deck.
A lot of books I had to go through. One of my biggest was Rachel Pollack's 78, I think it's called 78 Degrees of Wisdom, where she goes really exhaustively into the background of things. But as I went through and as I studied what the cards mean and how they're interpreted, I also had to sort of decide, there was core meanings in terms of relationships, in terms of power, because this is a business class tarot deck. I wanted it to really speak to an entrepreneurial sensibility, both because that's what we have in our day and age, but also because I didn't want to try to drag in other elements. Like, I had to leave a lot of the traditional romance elements aside. If you could ask about your relationship with my cards, but you get a lot of cards devoted to partnerships. You would have to step back a little bit. But I thought that there were some things I had to leave out, and there were also some elements that have kind of worked their way into the tarot that really don't speak to my brand at all. Things about the conflict between pagan ideals and Christian ideals. I just had to look at those and say, well, other than the conflict itself, or maybe the tension, I couldn't really get too deep into some of that arcane stuff, and had to leave it behind. But there was about 6 weeks of going through and working with the concepts. And one thing that I realized early on was everyone kind of wants to get to the big cards, what they call the major arcana, what I call the executives. But that's kind of the wrong way to go, because when you look at the major arcana or the executives in my deck, they contain elements of all the other cards, the suit cards. And you need to be able to build up. Starting with the deck is kind of like starting with the Death Star explosion and then trying to fill in all the stuff about Tatooine. No, you kind of got to build up to the climax. And in the same way that as that my example, I felt, and I also talked to the artist about, develop the smaller cards first. Start with the aces and the twos and the threes, work your way up to those, and then go into the big major arcana, the executive cards, because they're going to pull a lot of different elements that you've already established in the deck. So you have to kind of step back and work through it and not grab the exciting things first, because you need to build up to that, and you need to have your symbols ready. You need to have your concepts ready. You need to have your own ideas about what these things mean in order to have it feel solid and not just, thrown together.
Definitely.
I know that I've done some readings at work with the deck that we got, that I bought in Colorado, but I also, so like the readings are good. I also I'm using tarot in a terrible way, that I've just been giving the cards away because I really enjoy the artwork. And I've been told that that's just like...
You're so generous. That's so great.
Yeah. Well, it's just like, I've been told by people that are super into tarot that Tara, no, that means all of the readings are now off. But I gave Michael Tamlin, Kobo's CEO, the CEO card, and I went in and just I was just explained what the deck was, and I was like, here, and he really liked the idea, and he was just like, my entrepreneur friends there, they have to have these decks. But when he realized that the CEO equated with the emperor, he was kind of like, that's not really me though. So I get what you mean about the smaller cards are probably actually the ones that are much more important to put the emphasis behind. And sure, graphically it looked really nice, but he's just I'm not really all encompassing.
Well, even there, what people look at in a tarot concept may not be exactly I mean, what people get out of it certainly is relevant to them, but that's an example. When people talk about CEOs, certainly CEOs are very powerful figures in their companies. But to me, if you look at the CEO image in my deck, it's a bunch of different photographs, one on a tablet, one thing. And it's kind of like you're looking at the desk of the corporate communications person who's putting out which photos are going to go to which magazines, because the CEO is a very public figure. You know, they may not be public as Elon Musk is, for example, but they're not only there just to run the company, they're also there to provide inspiration, to provide motivation. So they do, in a way, have an emperor's role, whether they don't have the ability to chop off heads, but they're there to sort of decide who is what the company's direction finally is, where they're going, how they're going to develop it. And this is the kind of power dynamics that I wanted to explore in a new concept. You know, that was another example, was the board of directors replacing the Pope, or the Hierophant in the older decks. I know the board of directors has a lot of institutional knowledge, it has a lot of tradition, but it's not necessarily on the front lines. You know, there's a difference between the Pope and the priests in the individual churches, just in the same way the board of directors is providing advice to the people running the company, but they're also on the golf course a lot. They're not in the same location as the people who are making the decisions, and you have to finally be responsible, good or ill, with the final call. So these are the kind of dynamics that once you get into the deck, the meanings are specific to situations, and it's important to look at, not just the name, and recognize, what does that role mean in your life? What does that role mean when you're trying to understand a job-related question?
And then I also noticed that there's no gender associated with certain cards, or like something that was typically male is now like female, and vice versa.
Yes.
Was that like a specific, you wanted to make it diverse in that way?
Certainly, I wanted to make it diverse in that way. I wanted to make it diverse. It was certainly with gender. We mixed up if you're not familiar with tarot, for those in the audience who aren't, there's ace through 10, and then kind of like playing cards, there's royal cards. Traditionally in the tarot, there's 4 of them, king, queen, knight, and page. In my deck, they are VP, manager, director, manager, and assistant in descending order. And I wanted to not have all of the top figures be male, which is normally what you find in a traditional tarot deck. I wanted to have all of them be accessible to different people, different backgrounds, because the stories are not just about, oh, I happen to be born a boy and I got to be king. These are all people who presumably have gotten their jobs by working their way up toward them. And it's a very different approach that we have in this day and age to power. And I wanted to be able to reflect that. Also, I wanted, there's a lot of women who use tarot, and I wanted them to be able to see themselves, when the readings are appropriate, in a role of being in charge, in a role of taking action, because presumably a lot of my audience that's using this deck is seeking guidance on taking action and on whether to be in charge, whether to step back from something. I wanted that to be available. The same way, tarot is a European tradition, so almost all the tarot decks you're going to find have, European looking faces on them. And I changed that as well. I wanted to make it open to everyone. In fact, we never specifically, although I set genders for the different cards, I never specifically set skin tones or racial characteristics. We very much left that towards the end of the process, when we had gone through the art and we're down to the actual coloring, which was, again, a third individual was involved, Allison Carl, who's a comic book artist. We were running behind, and so we brought in 2 more people, Allison Carl to do the colors and Studio Juliet to do the production design. And so we saved that for later in the process, and I think that was another good call, because you could sort of develop organically and in the kind of random way that one is likely to find out in the real world. You don't know who you're going to meet anymore when you do it. You're meeting people by their jobs, you're meeting people by their professional capacities, and it's not telegraphed in advance the way it was even 40 years ago that they're going to be white and male. And I wanted to be able to reflect that in my deck.
So how long was the process actually from like idea to finished product? How long did that take?
For me, just to get the storyboarding done was about 6 to 8, probably, I call it 7 weeks. of, full days of work. I was reading, I was working out things, trying to understand things. I even printed out the concepts I had on on index cards, and I would play with them a little bit and say, oh, okay, they relate this way. Then the original goal was Jamin was going to be done with the art in 2 months. And after 2 months, he was nowhere near done with the art. He had not quite finished the line art. And he had a vacation booked with his family to go to the British Isles. So I said, well, what can we do in your absence? And he said, well, I'm not really sure. I said, well, what if we get more people involved? And that was how we brought in Allison and Studio Juliet for the production design. And so for a month he was gone, and we bounced back ideas of color palettes, of what the box would look like, because I wanted the box to be part of the branding too. I wanted it to be like, I don't want just to be only available in game stores. And I said to the production designer of Studio Juliet, I said, what if I wanted to get this into Sephora? What kind of a cool modern look would it have? Because it's business class. I wanted it to look elegant. I wanted it to look like a presentation gift, something of quality. So then Jamin came back from his holiday, and we were probably, I think from the time we started, let's say I started in March, we finally went to print in late November. So it was, how many months is that? That's like 7 months, 8 months, something like that. Well, plus he was away for a month, but still we got a lot done in the month he was away. So yeah, it took a long time. I now understand in a way why a lot of tarot card decks are single creators, because one person can perhaps, keep going in evenings and weekends, but to do it as a collaborative effort when, you need to get it out quickly, it can take a long time. But everyone was really very focused on it, and we threw a lot of great creative energy into it. But yeah, it took probably, from my end, other than managing it, it was 3 months, the art 5 months all told.
Did you do anything to generate buzz before it was actually ready, or did you kind of just promote it at the end?
I had already, I put it on Kickstarter. That was one big one. That was where I first got the big attention. I mean, I would post on social media a little bit, but until I had card concepts, it was hard to go. And so we emphasized having 6 cards, the 4 aces and the first 2 of the executives ready to go for a Kickstarter that I kicked off August 1st of 2018. And I did a 30-day Kickstarter that ran right into Dragon Con, which is a big Comic-Con that happens every year in Atlanta, usually around the first weekend of September. And although I didn't have any product there, I wanted to be able to come to Dragon Con with my novel, but also say, yes, I have a completed Kickstarter for my tarot, but that meant I had to get the backing. During the Kickstarter, I was interviewed in a couple of tarot blogs. The word started to spread in the tarot community. And that was really the initial part of it. And then once that was going on, then I had the marketing, the Facebook page, the website. I had a bunch of people to email updates to and let them know about, where we were doing well and what delays we hit. We hit some delays in the printing process also. So yeah, it was the Kickstarter was probably the biggest single element to get the marketing going before I had product to sell. And then once I had product to sell, then did a few Facebook ads and things. I'm still developing that because I only have so much bandwidth to sell the thing. So right now it's on my own website and it's on Etsy. And as my novel goes into its new release, I'm onto other e-commerce sites. And I hope to use the 2 of them in a synergistic way to let them, find each other's audience and help grow the audience. Because tarot and urban fantasy, they go together.
Nice. So how did you find that this kind of project impacted your book and your readership?
I think my readership was enthusiastic about it, and it definitely has increased my sales. It's one of the reasons why we're issuing a new edition of the novel with a new, brighter cover and with the branding a bit closer to the look of the tarot deck. I also feel more comfortable in looking for a wider audience. The original release of the novel was very ebook focused, but now that I have a print product out, I think I'm going to be making much more of an effort to get books into stores. Ideally, both the tarot and the novel are going to have paper copies. I mean, it's an ebook world right now. And Kobo absolutely is a big part of that. I think also having done a print product, I want to find that same audience that's interested in it. And, print books have a visual element that's hard to duplicate virtually. I'm still going to, of course, be pushing hard on the new edition of the ebook.
Yeah.
Another thing that's actually a kind of a small item, in the original novel, the cards are mostly talked about rather than described, but early on there's one passage where they're described. And the descriptions don't jive with what we wound up actually developing in the tarot card deck. I wanted to give the creative people more freedom to interpret. I wanted to give myself more freedom to interpret than just the deadline of writing a novel. So I actually have gone back and edited that one page. The descriptions in the novel go with the actual business class tarot deck. Plus, I'm reproducing. The novel's divided into 9 parts. It goes by months: April 2009, May 2009, so on. And now for each part, there's one of the images of the tarot deck that's from that very first reading on each of the pages in black and white. So I'm definitely tying them in more and hoping to have each of them help support the other. And they both represent the same sensibility. They both speak to similar audiences and will delight, I think, similar audiences. I don't want to make it so that you have to get one to understand the other. They're each separate things. But like I said, they can go together like chocolate and mint.
Yeah, I like the idea that like you were focused on ebooks initially, but then this has kind of opened up an avenue for you to go down to print for something that you potentially wouldn't have done before. So yeah, it's cool having like a physical thing to help drive like a new audience, because print readers aren't necessarily the same as digital readers. So
right.
Yeah. Did you learn anything from this process that just kind of surprised you?
Well, certainly I learned it takes longer than you think. And although it's a cliche that fast, good, and cheap, you only get 2 out of 3, is definitely, it bore out in my personal experience. And so I tend to emphasize the good more than anything else, because I knew this is a product that was going to be around a long time. And that would be, for many people, their first encounter with me, my artistic sensibility. So I was a little bit Steve Jobsian about that. What else did I learn? It took the Band-Aid off of the idea of publishing and printing and all those things. It's a very daunting thing if you've never done it before, but having spent a lot of time, it made me feel good about my ability to collaborate with others. Writers don't necessarily get a lot of experience with that. We tend to be by ourselves. And then most of our engagements, if we're lucky enough to find publishers and editors, are to kind of take what they say and to work with them as, their experience in the commercial realm. So I think that having done this by myself and with other people in a different medium, it made me more confident going forward, both in being able to set a direction, but also in being able to let, professionals have their own input and see how that makes my work better and not view it as simply. I think sometimes writers get a feeling that it's almost adversarial. They're like, well, I have to do this because the editor says so. It's like, no, the editor is there to make this a better book too. Take the free advice. Your name's still on the cover. And that was, I think, something I learned about.
Because indie publishing is like authors taking control of the business themselves, like becoming business people or authorpreneurs, as some people like to call themselves. Did the tarot deck teach you anything about like your business as a writer? Like, have you used the deck on yourself to sort of like further any kind of indie publishing suggestions or anything?
Well, that is, I would say that yes, and I intend to do more of that in the future. Right now, the particular focus of the last few weeks has been on the reissue, on the kind of the meat of making the new book, getting the cover, getting the typesetting done. I just announced on my blog last week that the reissue is coming. Also, finally, my audiobook is coming out, so I've been doing a lot of different things. Yeah, I so look forward to getting the audiobook out. I have a tremendous new narrator named Laura Peterson, and she's worked so hard because my novel has, not joking, over 70 character voices in 12 different countries' accents, and she's done them all. And it's been such a delight to hear how hard she's worked and how to get this out. So there's been a lot going on, but I really feel that going forward, I can use them both, have, from the smallest things like the occasional giveaway from one site to the other, but also being able to go to print bookstores and say, I have this and I have that, being able to tie the concepts together in the print and ebook versions with the illustrations. But as a business level, I've had to learn to be even more forward in my marketing than I think I ever was with the first edition of the novel. Because before I had a publisher who was there as well, Wordfire Press. But now, as I'm coming in with the new edition and I've done all this new work with the tarot, I've had to realize, you have to get this word out there. The audience does not have much of an opportunity to find out about you, the audience that really wants to find out about you. So it's taken that Band-Aid off, really just, do it. You have to be out there, you have to be able to get in there, and also to be able to come back when something doesn't work. It's very much, in the development of the tarot, there were times when I would do something and I would just see from an art level that a concept I had, it wasn't drawable. Maybe I could envision it in my head, but when some very talented artist still can't make it work, go back to the drawing board. And I think that applies to your marketing too. You don't just say, oh, can't market my book anymore. Oh, I made one mistake. You have to be able to come back and really keep going with it, because it is a long game. The way that I'm working this, coming up with these different audiences, trying to get them to connect, it is not something that there's a lot of beaten paths to find. I have to do it myself, and I have to keep doing it. So that's really been one element in the business level, is additional marketing, new perseverance, and keeping the energy up.
Nice. I like that you literally went back to the drawing board at some point.
Yeah.
If anyone was listening and wondering how they can use the deck, like can they use it themselves, or how should they best go about learning how to use the deck, your deck specifically? Well,
I provide a very long guide. One of a lot of times when people buy tarot decks, the guidance I think is lacking. There's a lot of wonderful tarot decks that are out there that are gorgeous art, and then you have this little 8-page stapled, or even just one continuous sheet that's folded into several pages. I have a 240-page full color guide with meanings about all the cards, guidance, history, understanding of how to do it. I even have gaming rules, because in France and Germany and in Quebec, they still play tarot as a regular card game. It's a trick-taking game, kind of like bridge. And I thought, well, gaming is a great way to understand your colleagues, so why not embrace that element too? I provide a huge guide. Speaking just here, the difference between doing a reading and just looking at the cards is that the cards have a lot of different picture symbols. But understanding a reading, learning what a particular thing has to say, like when you lay out readings, some cards are meant to represent the present, the past, the future, an emotional feeling versus an actual event that's going to occur. And cards are not really, they're enigmatic, I think is probably the best way to put it. And I wanted to embrace that enigmatic and surreal side, but that's at a cost of some clarity. You have to look at a card, you have to say, well, what does this maybe speak to? That's why when Tara and you and I were talking earlier about the CEO as an example of a meaning, it's not just enough to say, well, that's somebody in charge. It's someone who's in charge but very public facing and who's being looked at. And to have that in your past might not mean that you were necessarily in charge, but it might speak to the feeling that you were being watched a lot, and maybe now you're being given credit that you weren't being given before. In the future, that's some new energy you can use. So being able to look at cards and kind of understand the symbols behind them and figuring out which ones apply in a particular point in a reading, which ones apply in the meaning that they might have to you at that moment. That's part of the engagement with the cards, and that's why you want to have them be symbolically interesting and symbolically complex, so that you can really think them through. They're great for giving you new perspectives on questions, because too often when we think about what do we do here, what am I supposed to do, we wind up in the same old patterns because we don't have any direct experience. Well, the cards don't provide experience, but they can give you a new look to your problem, a new look to how you were conceiving it. It's like, wow, all that time that I felt I was being like spied upon. I never really thought that I was being spied upon because people cared about my output, and now they're giving me credit that I've earned, and I can use that going forward. So being able to recast your own ideas about your past and your future, it may wind up being an accurate interpretation, it may not, but it's as much about shaking up your attitude towards something, getting out of the old rut of your thinking. And I think that in itself is a really helpful approach. So yeah, I think that you can do your own readings. People have their own woo-woo about the tarot. People feel that, I've heard people say you can only read from a deck that you were gifted, not one that you bought. I have one friend who I gifted a deck to, and her daughter wants readings from her, but won't touch her mom's deck because it's her mom's deck. So I think that people bring their own ideas and energy to it, and I'm not gonna discount any of that. It's how people get into this creative space where they're open to new information, and if they follow different traditions, cards, some people don't do upside down meanings as being different from right side up meanings. In the book, the guidebook that comes to the deck, I go both ways. I provide modified versions of the traditional upside down meanings, which are usually some kind of negative of the card's traditional meaning, but it may not be the negative you're thinking of. It may be that it's, if it's a negative card already, it might be a new positive thing, or you're coming out of a bad time. It may be that a bad time is going on for longer. But some people don't do upside down readings. Some people do. I want it to be a tool. If you're going to use this tool in the way that you are used to using it, I want you to feel comfortable. If you've never used it, you want to just flip through and look at the pretty pictures and use them to inspire some thoughts, that's great. But if you want to really dive in, I give you the tools to do it.
Yeah, that's funny. It's like when I was getting told off for having like not a full deck because I've been giving away the images, and I was just like, didn't think it was that big a deal. And because I just interpreted it as like, it's fun and like you can put into it what you want to. Some people take it very seriously. I kind of, like you said, I think it's a good inspiration point, maybe vaguely answer a question that must have been bothering you if you're asking it. But yeah, it's kind of funny how it's like so open to interpretation too. Like it kind of suits everyone.
Good.
Should this be your segment?
I know. I was going to say, I'm very excited for you to do a reading for Steph because I really enjoyed the reading that we had in Colorado. But should we ask the two last questions first and then do the reading?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So what can readers expect from you next? So other than you're kind of rebranding your book slightly, are you working on a follow-up story? Anything else coming out for your readers?
I am finishing up a new novel that has the same sensibility, but it's not part of the world of Demon in Business Class or a Business Class Tarot. It's a far future science fiction novel that I'm very excited to get out there. It's called The White Lake. It reads like one of my books, but it's not a sequel in any way. It's very different. It's set in a far future, very damaged world, both ecologically and by war. That's the next thing coming out. After that, I really have a couple of other novels ideas, but I tend to write standalones. That was why the Business Class Tarot concept was, I think, appealing to me, because I knew that Demon wasn't ever going to get its own sequel. It comes to an end, and I like doing that, but being able to translate its ideas into a different form was very good. I'm not a series writer. A long time ago, I read an article in Time magazine about the film director, Wes Anderson, and they said that he doesn't have a bunch of films, he has a body of work. And I'm like, that's me. I get that. I get the idea that there's an Anthony Dobranski-ness in writing that I want to get out there, but it's not tied to any one particular story that I'm telling over many volumes. I like telling different novels and finishing them. So that's The White Lake is the next one coming out. And people who are fans of the Demon in Business Class or of Business Class Tarot, I think they're really going to enjoy it, but it's not the world that they've learned in those two works.
And then given what's happening in the world right now, we like to say, what have you been loving lately that someone can enjoy, that you've also been enjoying?
What have I been loving lately that someone can enjoy? Well, given that we've been stuck at home, I've been spending a lot of loving time with my family, but that is not exactly something that others can enjoy. There's been some good TV. I like the new Star Treks that are coming out. I'm really impressed with the new Picard series. That's been a lot of fun. I enjoy it more than I ever did the earlier versions of those characters. I'm an old original series fan, so there's that one. What books have I read lately? Gosh, I've been so tied up with my own, I have to step back and think what I really liked. I finally got through the Jeff Vandermeer novels, The Southern Reach, And I'm just about to start his newest one, Dead Astronauts, but I haven't read that. But Jeff Vandermeer has been a real touchstone for me the last couple of years. I love his writing style, but I also love how committed he is to genre, and not in an apologetic way. He's absolutely like, I'm going to write a great literary genre book. And he did. The Southern Reach, if people haven't read it, Annihilation, the first one, was made into a movie. We kind of made into a standalone movie. As a book, it's the beginning of a trilogy that's very unusual, but it's about a section of Florida that becomes different. It becomes a lot more ecologically clean in a seeming way, but at the same time, the things that are in it are not the wildlife and the plant life that was there before. Something seems to be both cleaning things up but also invading, and how the human beings that are around it are dealing with it. And I would even say that the second book, Authority, it's giving me some vibes about what we're going on currently with the coronavirus and how governments respond and fail to respond to things that are new to them. So
yeah, Steph, you'll have to read that. Having just come back from Florida, it's going to be right up your alleyway.
Maybe that will be me.
Cool. Well, you were kindly going to do a reading for us, so let's segue over to Steph. You have to. So what was it? She has to come up with like a business related like question in your mind. So you don't have to say it out loud.
I don't have to say it out loud. Okay.
No.
Well, I mean, so the genesis of me doing readings is I am definitely not a medium, but as Tara said earlier, when we did this writing conference together, I did $5 readings in the bar after hours as a fundraiser for the Seminar Scholarship Fund, because the seminar, writing seminars, getting all these people together, it costs money, but they want to keep it open to all the people. So Superstars Writing Seminars has the Don Hodge Scholarship Fund, named after a writer who worked with them. And so I raised a little bit of money. I wound up raising, $125 for the fund, which was quite nice.
That's awesome.
A whole bunch of different readings, over 2 nights. Tara was one of my first to test my psychic abilities. And
once I saw you set up, I ran right over there. I was like, I need this reading.
And because it's lighthearted, because it's fun, but because also I think that it's something that people are comfortable in a more public setting, I restrict my questions to business-related ones. It's also good at Comic-Cons when I just do quick 3-card readings. I say, so what's on your mind professionally? Because it's business class tarot. And it was there where I would do readings for people, and the people would say, oh, that's really interesting. But the people with the people would say, oh, man, that's totally you. Oh, I totally see that. I'm like, oh, I have a gift for this. Perhaps my writing empathy is able to reach out into a larger domain. I mean, you have to be open to woo-woo if you're going to be a fiction writer. I certainly believe that.
I am.
Character.
I'm open to that.
Steph and I, when we were in New York, we went to Romance Writers of America there last year, and we got our auras photographed. So this is right up our alleyway.
Cool.
Your aura was just so much brighter than mine. Mine was really, I can't even, it's on my fridge right now actually, but I can't remember what it looks like.
But
I thought it was so different.
Are there ways to brighten your aura?
No, because it's based off your chakras, right? So no, I guess not. And
you need a new cycle to come by.
Yeah, it's based on a 3-week period. So I've had mine done in the same place since then, and it was a totally different color. So it's quite interesting.
Was it as bright?
I think it went from being reddy purple to being yellowy green.
The reason I ask is because that's one other thing about tarot and fortune telling, is that I definitely am of the feeling that tarot is not meant to be like a deterministic thing. It's meant to be a guide. So if you get a bad reading out of a tarot card reading, it's not like, oh, you're doomed. Can you pay in cash right now, please? Because you're not going to be around much longer. It's that there are things you can change, and here are the things that you should be looking at to change. This is how the future might work if you don't stop and take stock of things. So I definitely want to emphasize that element of tarot. I don't want to be like, oh yes, I will tell you how you will die. Nothing like that. It's really much more, this is what I'm seeing, the energies are coming off. This is what you can see yourself in your life. But mostly when people ask questions, they want to know not just will it work out for me, they want to know how it can work out for me. And so that's what I hope that people take away when they're working with any kind of an inspirational tool or a divinational tool, is that it's not simply about your fate There's the great myth of Croesus, where Croesus went to the Oracle of Delphi and asked, should I wage war on the Persians? And the Oracle said, if Croesus wages war on the Persians, a great empire will fall. Which is, if you listen to it, like, that's not really ringing endorsements. But Croesus is like, great, he waged war on the Persians and he lost. And he was their prisoner for many months until he gave some of his riches to them. So the trick is that you have to be able to step back and say, well, what am I actually hearing here? And that is, I think, something to go forward when you're getting a reading, is to remember that, this is not your fate. I am not your agent of doom. I am here to help talk through things.
All right, Steph, are you not going to be worried now?
I'm not worried. Well, who knows? Like, I came back from Florida. Who's not worried right now?
So have you got a business thing in mind?
So how specific should it be? Should it be a general question, or can it be as specific as you want?
It can be whatever you want to. What is on your mind professionally, Stephanie?
I don't know. I gotta think. What should I do next? Maybe that. A general.
What should I do next?
I know.
Well, talk to me. What are we talking about in your domain? Are you talking about new directions for your work, new directions for the writing life, new directions for other things? What are the doing options that you're getting? And while you're talking, I'm going to shuffle a bit.
I'll say new directions for, we'll say Kobo Writing Life. We'll keep it specific.
Kobo Writing Life?
Yeah. We'll say my job in doing something with that, either through the podcast, we'll say, or my own work outside of the podcast.
Okay. So do we want to try to video this, or should I just take the cards as I go?
All right. Let's try.
All right. I think I can do it. All right. Okay, let's see what the cards have to say about Stephanie's question. First, Money 3. Money 3 is a card of working hard, trying to do great and excellent things. You'll see these 3 figures. They represent different departments in their company. And if you look closely at the parking lot, the light is on. They're working hard. They're working late. So Money 3 is a card about trying to do and find excellence. This represents you. This represents your question. Covering you, the environment in which you find yourself. Brand assistant. Brand assistant. Assistants are always cards of positive energy. They're cards of helpful energy. Brand assistant is very much a facts on the ground kind of assistant. They're not pulling in a lot of information that's outside of your domain. They're trying to understand what you have and where you are currently. Crossing you, Data 7. Data 7 is an energy of being too individual and going off on your own. And even though there's a fire in one of these servers, some of them are still glowing green. So it's a card where if you go off half-cocked on your own, you'll probably do all right. But it's a card that suggests that if you got some people helping you, you might do better. So that's what's crossing you. That is the obstacle to overcome, is that you have a drive to excel. You have a drive to, you have an ability to understand the current situation, but maybe you need some input from other people, or maybe you need to filter through some input from other people to get to where you want to go in the next phase. Below you, the experience. Now, the experience is a very powerful card. In a traditional tarot deck, it's the Lovers. And this is one where I had to do a lot of reinterpreting, because the Lovers does not mean what we would think it meant. It doesn't mean exclusively sexual energy. It's more about disruption. You know, in a very different time, love and love outside of the bounds of sanctioned marriage was a very disruptive force. And if you're a politician, it probably still is. But for most people, the experience is a transformative energy that brings something to you that has made a lot of people founder. If you look in the background of the experience card, you'll see there's a few people who've been laid low by these lightning bolts, and only the 2 figures in the front have been superpowered by them. So the experience in your past means you have been through something that gave you a new perspective, and it was something that you felt you had to act on. Behind you, Product Ace. Product Ace is a card of a successful new beginning. And since your question was about Kobo Writing Life, it means that I think you feel, and the world and the cards feel, that Kobo Writing Life is doing pretty well. It had a good launch. It's gotten its name out there. And that now this is an energy to build on. there's a lot of people around this container, and they are all people whose careers and livelihoods were involved in the making of the product, but also whose world is about to get a lot better, they hope, by making this product and putting it out into the world. Above you, Data 5. Data 5 is not you. Data 5 is someone who is opposing you, and Data 5 is someone who is opposing you and is dominant. So it's a card that expresses that Kobo Writing Life, while successful, has a lot of competition in this world, and has a lot of competition both for other people's attention, but also a lot of commercial competition. Ahead of you, designers. Designers, the traditional magician in the tarot deck, here divided among the different disciplines, trying to recapture the magic of the human heart and their different ways working together and understanding the complexity of their task. Designers is a card that involves harmony, the seeking of harmony. So again, it speaks to this Data 7 energy we had seen earlier, where going by yourself and not seeking other advice, despite the initial success and despite the tremendous start, is not where you need to be. You need to find others to help you go forward. So whatever you want to do going forward with Kobo Writing Life, I think it's going to involve other people, some different input, perhaps some people who you wouldn't have thought to talk to about it before. Maybe this means that Kobo Writing Life needs some different kinds of guests, such as tarot creators. Maybe it means that Kobo Writing Life needs perhaps some new challenges. Maybe you're looking at some more video data like this card reading. But it's something where you're probably not going to be coming up with the ideas on your own, and you shouldn't put that onus on yourself. So now, this reading is a traditional reading known as a Tree of Life reading. In my book, in my guidebook, Keeping to Brand, I call it the plus minus. It's also the first reading you find in the Demon in Business class. It's a reading that is meant to provide an overview of a situation and a direction. So that was the plus, and then here is the minus. But this is not to say these are negatives. It's just the final 4 cards that are expressing an energy. So the first one, representing you again, human resources. Human resources is a card of collaborative energy, of support, of success in the service of institutional goals. So this is not the happy friendship, partnership card. This is a card of people who have your back. Now, if this represents you, this suggests to me that, like the other collaborative cards, like designers and like Data 7, that this is a time for you to be seeking what support you have in the Kobo organization, where you want to be, where you feel that others in Kobo would best be involved. So this is a card definitely, again, about getting collaboration. Your environment, money ace. Money ace means an essential thing that you need to get forward. Obviously, money is what many commercial enterprises need to succeed. The card nods to the Edinburgh 18th century philosophers such as Adam Smith and David Ricardo, who came up with the original ideas on which our capitalist society is founded, the original philosophies and economic thought. But here, it's just a lighthearted way of approaching. Also, you can see a lot of details that my artist put in on this card. As a side note, if you look closely at I'm not sure how well the webcam's going to focus, but one figure here has a lot of boxes for the product suit and their thing. There's hearts for the brand trump and the woman's coat. And then hidden in this figure are little nods to the data suit. So there's a lot of little elements that Jamin has put into these cards that just were a delight to discover on repeated viewing. So the environment you're in is where you have a lot of good energy to help you in what you want to do. Your hopes and dreams. Brand 8. Brand 8 is a card about finding a new path. You'll notice there's a whole bunch of people sitting warm by the fire, but just up here in the corner, is the glare letting me show you that?
No, I can see.
Yeah, there's one figure up in the upper corner who's walking off, has left their jacket behind, and is trying to find something new. Now, away from the fire, it's not as cold and it's not as bright, but some people still make this journey. So I think that your hope is to find a new and interesting direction. That was certainly what you expressed, and I think that's something that you should definitely keep a hold of as you go forward. And As an outcome, Data Director. Data Director is a complicated card. Data Director is a card that embraces new thinking. Data Director is a card that has herself been sometimes unfairly dismissed or looked over and has had to work hard to get through. You'll notice that she has a little bit of blood on her leg, and so does that nice little corporate award next to her. This is a woman who has fought some battles in her quest for personal and professional success. And if this is your outcome, it says to me that you need to think in a big, wide way about the project you have. You need to embrace some unconventional thoughts, but also, as we talked about earlier, expect to dust yourself off from a couple of false starts. So, is that all here? So that is what the cards are telling me for you. The question is how to move forward with Kobo Writing Life, get some more input, try a few things. Not everyone's going to work, but you are wise if you get some help and count on that help in trying to look for new directions and make new things happen. So say the
Steph, I think that this rings true for you. You're like new opportunities, but you try and go things solo, but you should ask for help.
Thinking of my disc profile, I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of a very similar thing, right, to disc. So yeah.
Yeah, that was cool.
I'm glad you enjoyed. Well,
all right. Well, thanks very much.
You're most welcome. It was a delight to talk to you both. I'm so excited to share Business Class Tarot with Kobo Writing Life. Anything else I can talk about before we end the podcast? Do we want to talk about the giveaway?
Yeah, kind of explain what's going to be in the giveaway.
So, we are giving away one copy of Business Class Tarot to a Kobo Writing Life listener. And in that is a full Business Class Tarot Kickstarter gift set. It includes the deck itself, which is 78 full color cards, casino quality linen finish, plus the 240-page guidebook, all in a presentation gift box, plus 9 additional cards here. Since we still have the video running, I can show these, or you can edit them in. These are the Kickstarter special foil edition gift cards. They look like the cards, but they're also foil etched and shiny. They are the 4 aces. Money Ace was one you saw, and Product Ace was also another one you saw. Plus, Designers was another card that was in this reading. So these were a set of 9 foil-edged cards that were a special benefit to Kickstarter backers. And also the always important and always helpful Business Class Tarot luggage tag, which identifies you to airport handlers anywhere as someone to be reckoned with as a professional force.
I love it.
Those 3 are together for a Kobo Writing Life listener. And thank you very much from me and Business Class Tarot for listening and spending time with us today.
Perfect.
Thanks so much, Anthony.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in purchasing Anthony's book, The Demon in Business Class, you can use coupon code ClassyKobo at checkout to receive 26% off your purchase. If you're interested in buying your own Business Class Tarot deck, you can do so from the businessclasstarot.com and use a coupon code ClassyKobo again to get 25% off.
Double the savings.
And that's CLASSYKOBO if you're wondering. And if you're interested in entering our giveaway to get your own Business Class Tarot deck,
it's super easy. All you need to do is follow us on Instagram or YouTube, pick one of your choice, and leave a comment and let us know what your favorite tarot card is. Mine personally is the Queen of Cups. I think she's real powerful.
I think mine is the Empress, mostly because I like how it sounds.
Nice.
But you have till June 1st to enter, and then we'll be contacting the winner on June 2nd. So make sure to let us know what your favorite card is.
This episode was produced by Stephanie McGrath and Tara Kremen. It was edited by Kelly Robotham, and music was by Tearjerker. And thanks to Anthony for joining us. If you're ready to start your self-publishing journey today, sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.